Sometimes destiny does not knock on the door. Sometimes it curls up quietly against your heart while you are still asleep. Before sunrise, the forest surrounding Willow Creek remained wrapped in a soft blanket of mist, where towering pine trees whispered gently beneath the fading glow of the moon. Hidden among wildflowers and weathered fences stood a small wooden cottage that looked almost forgotten by the rest of the world. Smoke no longer rose from its stone chimney because the fire had burned out sometime during the night, leaving only the comforting scent of cedar and old pine lingering inside the quiet home. Claire Bennett slept peacefully beneath a hand-stitched quilt her grandmother had made years before. At 23 years old, Claire had grown accustomed to simple mornings. Every day began the same way. She would wake before the village bells, gather fresh water from the nearby creek, feed the chickens behind her cottage, tend the small herb garden beside the porch, and carry homemade bread into the village market before most people finished breakfast. It was an ordinary life, one that many people overlooked, but Claire had long ago learned that peaceful routines could still hold quiet happiness. As the first rays of sunlight slipped through the narrow bedroom window, something warm shifted gently against her chest. Half asleep, Claire smiled faintly, believing one of her folded blankets had slipped during the night. Then she heard the smallest sound imaginable, a tiny sleepy sigh. Her eyes slowly opened. Resting comfortably against her heartbeat was a snow-white wolf pup no larger than a house cat. Its soft fur rose and fell with every peaceful breath as though it had slept there all night without the slightest concern. One tiny paw rested gently across Claire's shoulder while its nose disappeared beneath the edge of her blanket. For several long seconds, she simply stared, too surprised to move. The little creature looked perfectly content, as though this had always been its home. Claire carefully lifted one hand, afraid that even the smallest movement might frighten it away. Instead, the pup stretched lazily, opened brilliant silver eyes for only a moment, and then nestled even closer against her before falling peacefully back asleep. Claire could not help smiling. "Well," she whispered softly, "I suppose you decided I was comfortable enough." The tiny ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but the little wolf made no effort to leave. Claire slowly sat upright, while gently supporting the sleeping pup with both hands. Sunlight now filled the modest bedroom, revealing patched curtains, handmade wooden furniture, shelves lined with carefully labeled jars of dried herbs, and a vase holding freshly picked wildflowers from the previous afternoon. Everything inside the cottage reflected years of quiet care rather than wealth. The pup finally blinked awake again and looked directly into Claire's hazel eyes without fear. There was no growl, no hesitation, only innocent curiosity. Claire noticed a small leather collar resting loosely around its neck, beautifully crafted but completely unfamiliar. There was no family name engraved upon the polished silver tag, only an elegant symbol resembling a crescent moon embracing the outline of a wolf. She gently traced the engraving with one fingertip. "Someone must be looking for you," she murmured. The little wolf answered by licking her hand once before curling comfortably into her arms. Claire laughed softly, the warm sound filling the little cottage. After wrapping the pup inside her favorite knitted blanket, she carried it into the kitchen where morning sunlight streamed through the windows overlooking the forest. She poured fresh goat's milk into a shallow ceramic bowl and placed it carefully on the floor. The tiny wolf sniffed the milk, wagged its fluffy tail with surprising enthusiasm, and eagerly began drinking. Claire watched with quiet relief. "You must have been hungry." While the pup happily finished breakfast, Claire prepared oatmeal and warm bread for herself, glancing toward her unexpected visitor every few moments. She searched her memory for anyone nearby who owned a wolf pup, but nothing came to mind. Wild wolves avoided people, and trained wolves almost always remained close to their handlers. Yet this little creature showed no fear at all. When Claire reached for her coat to begin the day's work, the pup immediately trotted after her with tiny, determined steps, refusing to let more than a few feet separate them. Claire looked down and smiled with amused disbelief. "You are planning to stay with me today, are you not?" The pup barked once in cheerful agreement before sitting proudly beside the front door. Claire had no way of knowing that far beyond the mountains, inside the royal palace where ancient traditions shaped the future of the kingdom, a king had already begun waiting for the little messenger whose journey through destiny had quietly led it to the one heart it had been sent to find. Claire had planned to spend the morning exactly as she always did, but the tiny white wolf seemed determined to rewrite every ordinary habit she had ever known. The moment she stepped outside her little cottage carrying a basket of fresh bread, the pup hurried after her with energetic little paws, its fluffy tail wagging proudly as though it had lived beside her for years. Morning sunlight filtered through towering pine trees while cool air carried the fragrance of wildflowers and fresh earth across the quiet valley. Claire glanced down at her unusual companion and laughed softly. "You truly have no intention of leaving, do you?" The pup answered by brushing gently against her boots before looking up with bright silver eyes full of innocent trust. Claire could not imagine abandoning such a small creature, especially one that seemed completely comfortable in her presence. She knelt beside the cottage porch and carefully adjusted the little leather collar around its neck once more. The elegant crescent moon symbol caught the sunlight, confirming again that whoever owned the pup had taken excellent care of it. "We will ask around the village," she promised kindly. "Someone must be worried about you." Together they followed the winding dirt road leading toward Willow Creek. Farmers were already tending their fields while children chased butterflies near white wooden fences. As soon as the villagers noticed the tiny wolf trotting happily beside Claire, conversations immediately slowed. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, who owned the village bakery, stepped outside carrying a basket of warm rolls. "Claire," she called with surprise, "where did that little fellow come from?" Claire smiled politely. "I woke up and found him sleeping beside me this morning." Mrs. Carter blinked twice before shaking her head in disbelief. "Sleeping beside you?" Claire nodded. "I have never seen him before." Several nearby villagers quietly gathered, curious rather than frightened. Old Samuel Turner adjusted his weathered hat while studying the little animal carefully. "That is no ordinary wild pup," he observed. "Look at that collar." Claire gently lifted the silver tag so everyone could see the engraved moon symbol. "Does anyone recognize it?" The villagers exchanged uncertain glances, but no one answered. Young children soon surrounded the pup, smiling as it happily accepted gentle pats without showing the slightest fear. Claire watched carefully to ensure everyone remained respectful, and the tiny wolf responded with remarkable patience, wagging its tail every time another child laughed. "He is wonderfully gentle," one little girl whispered. Claire smiled. Perhaps kindness has already been shown to him. By late morning, Claire reached the village market where she usually sold homemade bread, fresh herbs, and jars of wildflower honey. Instead of wandering away, the pup curled comfortably beneath her wooden table, quietly watching every customer who stopped to visit. Throughout the day, dozens of people admired the little wolf, yet each time someone attempted to pick it up or carry it away, the pup politely stepped back before returning immediately to Claire's feet. The pattern repeated again and again until even the most skeptical villagers began noticing something unusual. "He only follows you," Mrs. Carter remarked. Claire looked down thoughtfully. "I noticed that too. Perhaps you should keep him." Claire gently shook her head. "Not unless I know he truly has no family searching for him." That answer alone reminded everyone why Claire had always been respected despite living such a simple life. She never chose convenience over doing what she believed was right. As afternoon sunlight softened across the valley, Claire closed her market stall and began walking toward the forest paths where she often gathered fresh herbs. The pup bounded happily ahead before suddenly stopping beside a narrow trail leading deeper into the pine woods. It turned back toward Claire and barked once before looking down the hidden path again. Claire smiled with amused curiosity. "Are you trying to show me something?" The little wolf wagged its tail enthusiastically before taking several more tiny steps into the forest and waiting expectantly. Claire followed at an easy pace, believing the playful creature had simply discovered an interesting place to explore. The quiet trail wound between ancient trees until they reached a peaceful clearing filled with white wildflowers dancing beneath the afternoon breeze. The pup sat quietly in the center of the clearing and looked around as though carefully memorizing every detail before returning to Claire and resting comfortably against her legs. She gently stroked its soft fur, unaware that the little wolf was following instincts far older than memory itself. Many miles away beyond the surrounding mountains, inside the great stone walls of Iron Cliff Palace, Alpha King Nathan Cole stood before an enormous map of the kingdom while Commander Ryan Brooks entered the council chamber carrying fresh reports from every territory. Ryan placed the scrolls upon the table with quiet concern. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, "there is still no sign of the little messenger." Nathan looked calmly toward the western forests where Willow Creek rested beyond countless miles of wilderness. Although his expression remained composed, hope quietly stirred within his silver-gray eyes. "Keep searching," he replied softly. "If the ancient rite has begun, then every step that little wolf takes is leading us toward the heart the moon goddess has already chosen." Morning sunlight gradually gave way to the golden warmth of afternoon. Yet inside the towering walls of Ironcliff Palace, the atmosphere remained unusually quiet. Alpha King Nathan Cole stood alone upon a wide stone balcony overlooking the royal gardens, where fountains shimmered beneath the clear spring sky. Beyond the palace walls stretched thousands of acres of forests, rivers, villages, and mountains that had prospered under generations of careful leadership. Nathan had protected every corner of that kingdom since accepting the crown. But there remained one responsibility no amount of strength or wisdom had allowed him to fulfill. At 32 years old, he was respected by every territory, admired by his people, and trusted by the royal council, yet he still walked alone. Behind him, the heavy wooden doors opened softly as Commander Ryan Brooks entered carrying several sealed scrolls collected from patrols across the kingdom. Ryan had served beside Nathan since they were both young men, learning the responsibilities of command, and unlike many advisors, he spoke honestly even when difficult truths needed to be heard. He quietly placed the scrolls across the polished council table before looking toward the Alpha King. "More reports from the western forests," Ryan said respectfully. Nathan turned from the balcony and walked toward the table. "Anything different?" Ryan slowly shook his head. "Only scattered sightings of the little messenger during the first 2 days. After that, nothing." Nathan studied the kingdom map spread across the table. Tiny colored markers identified every village, forest trail, and mountain pass where the young wolf had been seen before disappearing completely. His silver-gray eyes rested upon the western region where Willow Creek quietly existed among endless pine forests, though neither man yet realized its importance. Ryan folded his hands behind his back. "Some members of the council are beginning to worry the ancient rite has failed." Nathan remained silent for several thoughtful moments before answering. "The moon goddess has never been hurried by human expectations." Ryan smiled faintly. "You still trust the old tradition?" Nathan nodded. "I trust what our ancestors protected for centuries." He gently rested one hand upon the ancient leather journal lying beside the map. The worn volume contained handwritten records passed from one Alpha King to the next. Inside its fading pages, every ruler had documented important moments of history, victories, difficult decisions, and one mystery repeated again and again across generations. Ryan looked toward the journal with quiet curiosity. "You have read it many times." Nathan carefully opened the fragile book until he reached a page marked by a blue ribbon preserved for decades. Elegant handwriting filled the yellowed parchment. The first Alpha King wrote that no ruler should search desperately for the woman chosen by destiny. Ryan listened quietly. Nathan continued reading aloud. "When the kingdom is ready, a messenger born beneath the first full moon of spring shall walk without fear until it finds the one heart where kindness lives before ambition. The messenger will remain only where peace already exists." Ryan slowly looked up. "That is why the little wolf was raised inside the royal sanctuary." Nathan nodded. From birth it knew only trust, gentleness, and safety. It would never willingly remain beside someone driven by pride or cruelty. Ryan glanced again toward the kingdom map. "So wherever it finally chooses to stay," Nathan finished the thought softly, "is where my true mate already lives." Silence settled comfortably between them. Outside the palace windows, gardeners carefully tended blooming roses while white doves crossed the brilliant blue sky. Everything appeared peaceful, yet beneath that peacefulness rested centuries of hope quietly waiting for fulfillment. Ryan eventually spoke again. "Did you ever wish to ignore the tradition and simply choose your own bride?" Nathan smiled thoughtfully. "Many times." He closed the journal with gentle care. "It would certainly have been easier." Ryan laughed quietly. "The council would have preferred easier." Nathan looked back toward the western forests beyond the palace walls. "Perhaps, but easier does not always become wiser." His expression softened as though imagining someone he had never met. If the stories are true, somewhere in this kingdom lives a woman who has no idea that her kindness is already changing my future. Hundreds of miles away, Claire Bennett finished gathering bundles of fresh lavender and wild mint inside the peaceful forest clearing the little wolf had led her toward earlier that afternoon. The tiny white pup wandered happily among the flowers before returning to sit faithfully beside her feet. Claire smiled down at the cheerful little companion. You certainly know how to find beautiful places. The pup wagged its tail before gently nudging her hand as though encouraging her to keep walking. Claire laughed softly and followed the winding trail once again, completely unaware that every quiet step she took beside the tiny messenger was carrying two distant lives steadily closer together beneath the patient guidance of a destiny neither of them had yet begun to understand. The following morning dawned beneath a sky painted with soft shades of gold as gentle mist drifted between the towering pines surrounding Willow Creek. Claire Bennett stepped onto the front porch carrying a small basket filled with fresh herbs, expecting another peaceful day much like the one before. The tiny white wolf bounded happily out the front door beside her before pausing at the edge of the forest path. Instead of racing into the trees, the little creature turned back toward Claire and waited patiently, its bright silver eyes fixed upon her as though inviting her to follow. Claire smiled with quiet amusement. You have another adventure planned already, do you not? The pup answered with a cheerful bark before trotting several yards ahead and stopping once more. Curious, Claire adjusted the basket upon her arm and followed the winding trail beneath the morning sunlight filtering through ancient branches overhead. Songbirds greeted the new day while wildflowers painted the forest floor with gentle colors. Every few moments the little wolf looked back to make certain Claire remained close before continuing deeper into the woods. The trail eventually opened into another peaceful clearing unlike any Claire had visited before. A narrow stream flowed across smooth stones while white blossoms covered the grassy meadow surrounding it. The tiny wolf ran happily through the flowers before returning to sit proudly beside Claire's feet. She laughed softly. You certainly know the prettiest places in the forest. The little messenger leaned gently against her leg before looking toward the distant hills as though listening for something carried by the wind. Claire sat beside the stream and began gathering medicinal herbs growing near the water while the pup rested quietly beside her. Hours passed in comfortable silence broken only by bird song and the gentle sound of flowing water. She noticed something remarkable. Although squirrels, rabbits, and deer wandered through the clearing, none appeared frightened of the little wolf. Instead, they calmly continued grazing or drinking from the stream as though recognizing something peaceful within the tiny creature. Claire smiled thoughtfully. Even the forest trusts you. When the afternoon sun climbed higher, she packed her basket and started toward home. Once again, the pup insisted upon walking beside her every step of the journey. Back inside the village, curious neighbors greeted them warmly. Mrs. Evelyn Carter laughed as she watched the tiny wolf carrying one of Claire's gardening gloves in its mouth. I believe you have gained yourself a faithful shadow. Claire smiled. I still hope to find whoever belongs to him. Old Samuel Turner slowly approached, studying the elegant moon symbol engraved upon the collar once again. I have lived in this valley for nearly 70 years, he said thoughtfully, and I have never seen that crest before. Claire gently stroked the pup's soft fur. Then perhaps it came from somewhere very far away. Samuel nodded. Perhaps. As evening approached, Claire returned to her cottage where she prepared vegetable soup and fresh bread for supper. Before serving herself, she poured warm goat's milk into the little ceramic bowl. The tiny wolf eagerly finished every drop before curling contentedly beside the fireplace. Claire smiled as she draped a folded blanket over the sleeping pup. You are becoming very comfortable here. The little tail gave one sleepy wag before becoming still. Far beyond the western mountains, inside Iron Cliff Palace, Commander Ryan Brooks entered the royal library carrying an unexpected report. Nathan looked up from the ancient journal resting upon his desk. Have the scouts returned? Ryan nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. He unfolded a neatly written parchment. A merchant traveling through Willow Creek reported seeing a snow-white wolf pup wearing a silver moon collar. He said the little animal refuses to leave the side of a young woman living near the forest. Nathan slowly rose from his chair. Did he describe her? Ryan glanced down at the report. Only that she lives alone in a small cottage, earns her living through honest work, and is known throughout the village for her kindness. Nathan remained silent as the words settled into the quiet room. Something deep inside him stirred with calm certainty rather than excitement. He walked toward the palace window, overlooking the distant western horizon where the setting sun bathed endless forests in golden light. "Prepare the horses," he said softly. Ryan looked up immediately. "You intend to travel yourself?" Nathan nodded without taking his eyes from the horizon. If the little messenger has truly chosen to remain beside one heart above all others, then the journey entrusted to him may finally be reaching its end. Miles away, Claire gently extinguished the lamps inside her little cottage before settling into bed. The tiny white wolf climbed onto the blanket once again, circled twice, and peacefully curled against her chest exactly as it had on the first morning. Claire closed her eyes with a contented smile, never imagining that with every passing hour the mysterious owner she had hoped to find was already traveling toward the quiet life she believed would never change. The journey from Ironcliff Palace to Willow Creek lasted 2 peaceful days beneath clear spring skies. Yet to Nathan Cole it felt far longer than any royal campaign he had ever undertaken. He traveled with only Commander Ryan Brooks and a small escort, leaving behind the pageantry of the royal court in favor of quiet simplicity. Nathan wanted no grand announcement before meeting the woman whom destiny might have chosen. If the ancient rite truly guided the little messenger, then the first meeting deserved honesty rather than ceremony. As the horses crossed gentle hills and winding forest roads, Ryan glanced toward the Alpha King with quiet curiosity. "You have barely spoken since we left the palace." Nathan smiled faintly. "I have spent years wondering whether this journey would ever exist." Ryan nodded with understanding. "And now?" Nathan looked toward the endless pines stretching across the horizon. "Now I hope the woman waiting at the end of it has never been asked to become someone she is not." By late afternoon, the travelers reached the outskirts of Willow Creek, where modest cottages rested beside flowering meadows and narrow dirt roads curved between white fences. Children laughed near the village while farmers returned home with wagons full of fresh vegetables. It was the kind of peaceful place that reminded Nathan why protecting ordinary lives mattered more than any royal title. The little messenger had chosen well. Before entering the village square, Nathan exchanged his royal coat for a simple, dark traveling jacket. Only Ryan and the escort knew his true identity. The villagers greeted the strangers politely without recognizing their king. Mrs. Evelyn Carter welcomed them with fresh bread, while old Samuel Turner pointed toward the edge of the forest after Ryan quietly described the snow-white wolf pup wearing a moon collar. "You will probably find the little fellow beside Claire Bennett," Samuel said with a warm smile. "Those two have become nearly impossible to separate." Nathan felt an unfamiliar stillness settle inside him at the sound of her name. Claire Bennett. He repeated it silently, as though committing it to memory before he had even met her. Guided by the villagers, the small group followed a narrow path lined with wildflowers until a modest wooden cottage appeared between tall pine trees. Fresh herbs hung drying beneath the porch roof, while colorful flower boxes surrounded every window. Chickens wandered peacefully across the yard, and nearby a small vegetable garden reflected careful daily attention. Nothing about the cottage suggested wealth. Everything about it reflected kindness. Nathan dismounted quietly, asking the escort to remain behind so the peaceful afternoon would not be disturbed. As he stepped closer, he heard gentle laughter drifting from behind the cottage. He followed the sound until the trees opened into a sunlit clearing where Claire knelt beside rows of blooming herbs. The tiny white wolf happily chased butterflies through the grass before running back toward her with playful excitement. Claire laughed again, brushing a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear before gently scratching beneath the pup's chin. "You are supposed to be helping," she teased softly, "not making friends with every butterfly." The little wolf answered by happily circling around her feet before suddenly freezing in place. Its silver ears lifted. Its bright eyes looked beyond Claire toward the edge of the clearing. Without hesitation, the pup raced across the grass. Claire stood immediately, believing it had finally recognized its owner. She turned just as the tiny wolf reached Nathan and joyfully leaped into his waiting arms. Nathan gently held the little messenger against his chest, smiling with quiet relief. "You have done well, little one," he whispered. The pup affectionately licked his hand before twisting excitedly to look back toward Claire. Nathan slowly lifted his eyes. Across the meadow, Claire stood quietly beneath the afternoon sunlight, her basket of fresh lavender resting forgotten at her side. Their gazes met across the field, and in that single silent moment the world around Nathan seemed to disappear. The breeze stopped. Birds fell strangely quiet. Deep within him, the ancient wolf that had patiently waited through every passing year became completely still before bowing in perfect peace. Nathan had prepared himself to meet a stranger. Instead, he found himself looking into warm hazel eyes that somehow felt as familiar as home. Claire noticed the unexpected change in the traveler's expression and felt an unexplainable calm settle over her own heart. She did not know his name, nor the reason the little wolf had chosen her, yet nothing about the quiet man standing before her inspired fear. The tiny messenger happily ran back and forth between them with delighted energy, as though celebrating the completion of a journey only it had fully understood. Nathan finally found his voice. "I believe," he said gently, "you have been taking wonderful care of someone very important to me." Claire smiled with quiet sincerity. "He took care of me first." Claire stood quietly in the sunlit meadow while the tiny white wolf happily moved between her and the mysterious traveler, as though introducing two old friends who had simply forgotten each other. The gentle breeze carried the fragrance of lavender across the clearing, and for several peaceful moments neither of them spoke. Nathan found himself unable to look away from the young woman before him. Every instinct inside him remained perfectly calm. His wolf no longer searched, questioned, or wondered. It simply rested in complete certainty. Claire noticed the quiet kindness in the stranger's silver-gray eyes and felt an unexpected sense of trust she could not explain. She had met countless travelers over the years while selling bread and herbs in the village market, yet none had ever made the world feel so strangely peaceful. The little messenger finally settled at Nathan's feet before gently nudging his hand toward Claire as though encouraging him to continue. Nathan smiled softly. "My name is Nathan." Claire returned the warm smile with quiet sincerity. "I am Claire Bennett." Nathan inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you for caring for this little fellow. He means more than you could possibly know." Claire looked down at the tiny wolf, who had already curled comfortably against her boots again. "He has been wonderful company." She laughed softly. "Although I think he decided very quickly that my cottage belonged to him." Nathan followed her gaze and smiled. "He has always trusted his instincts." Commander Ryan Brooks approached at an unhurried pace, allowing the moment to unfold naturally before stopping a respectful distance away. He carefully observed the little messenger. Throughout the entire journey, it had never remained still for long, yet now it appeared completely content resting beside Claire. Ryan quietly exchanged a knowing glance with Nathan before speaking. "Your friend seems reluctant to leave." Claire looked toward Ryan with gentle curiosity. "Does he have a name?" Nathan knelt beside the tiny wolf and gently stroked its snow-white fur. The caretakers at the royal sanctuary simply called him Little Moon because of the white crescent marking hidden beneath his neck. Claire carefully brushed the soft fur aside and smiled as the tiny crescent became visible for the very first time. "It is beautiful." Nathan looked at the little marking before lifting his eyes toward Claire again. "It is considered a symbol of blessing among our people." Claire nodded thoughtfully. That explains why he never seemed afraid. Nathan hesitated for only a moment before making a quiet decision. "Claire, there is something important you deserve to know." She listened patiently. Little Moon did not become lost. Her expression filled with gentle surprise. He did not. Nathan slowly shook his head. He was sent on a journey. Claire looked down at the tiny wolf in disbelief before meeting Nathan's eyes again. "Sent by whom?" Before Nathan could answer, Ryan respectfully stepped forward and removed the simple traveling cloak covering Nathan's shoulders. Beneath it appeared the unmistakable black royal coat embroidered with the silver crest of Ironcliff Kingdom. Claire immediately recognized the ancient emblem she had seen only on royal banners during seasonal festivals. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with astonishment. She instinctively lowered her head. "Your Majesty." Nathan gently raised one hand. "Please." His voice remained calm and warm. "There is no need for formality here." Claire slowly looked back up, still struggling to understand. "You are the Alpha King." Nathan nodded once. I am. Silence settled over the clearing once more, broken only by birds singing high among the pine branches. Claire searched his expression for pride or expectation, but found neither. He stood before her with the same quiet humility she had first noticed only moments earlier. Nathan finally continued. For generations, when an alpha king came of age, one young wolf born beneath the first full moon of spring was entrusted with an ancient task. Claire listened without interruption. The messenger was never taught where to go. It simply followed the guidance placed within its heart by the moon goddess. Claire slowly lowered her eyes toward Little Moon, who now rested peacefully against her feet, as though the explanation changed nothing at all. Nathan smiled gently. The ancient records say the messenger will never remain where kindness is missing. It chooses only the heart where compassion feels like home. Claire whispered almost to herself, that cannot possibly be about me. Nathan answered with quiet certainty. When I found Little Moon today, I expected him to greet me first. He looked toward the cheerful little wolf, who immediately wandered back to Claire and leaned happily against her leg. Nathan smiled again. Instead, he chose you before he chose his king. Ryan quietly bowed his head, recognizing the ancient sign exactly as the old journals had described. The afternoon sunlight filled the peaceful clearing, while Little Moon looked back and forth between them with complete contentment, as though the smallest member of their gathering had just fulfilled the greatest purpose of his young life. The peaceful meadow no longer felt like an ordinary corner of the forest. Although nothing around them had changed, Claire sensed that the quiet life she had always known had gently shifted onto a path she could never have imagined. Little Moon remained happily pressed against her leg, completely content as though every purpose hidden within his tiny heart had finally been fulfilled. Nathan stood only a few feet away, his silver-gray eyes filled not with royal authority, but with quiet gratitude. He had spent years believing destiny belonged only to forgotten legends recorded in ancient journals. Standing before Claire, he realized those stories had simply been waiting for the right moment to become real once more. Claire finally found her voice. Your Majesty, I am only an ordinary woman. I sell bread, grow herbs, and take care of a little cottage. There are many women throughout the kingdom far more worthy than I could ever be. Nathan gently shook his head. That is exactly why the ancient right exists. Claire looked at him with quiet confusion. Nathan continued softly. If kings alone chose their future queens, many would choose according to status, wealth, or appearance. The moon goddess chose a different path. She entrusted the decision to a heart too innocent to understand power. He looked down toward Little Moon, who had already rolled onto his back, inviting Claire to rub his soft belly. She laughed quietly and accepted without hesitation. Nathan smiled warmly as he watched the tiny messenger close his eyes with complete trust. He cannot be impressed by titles, Nathan said. He cannot be persuaded by ambition. He only remains where he feels completely safe. Claire lowered her eyes toward the cheerful little wolf. Then perhaps he simply enjoyed the warm blanket. Nathan laughed softly, the sound surprising even himself. Ryan had not heard the Alpha King laugh so naturally in many years. Commander Ryan stepped forward with respectful calm. Your Majesty, the elders should be informed. Nathan nodded once before looking back toward Claire. Only if you are comfortable with that. Claire hesitated. Everything had happened so quickly that her thoughts struggled to keep pace with her heart. She looked around the peaceful clearing where she had gathered herbs only an hour earlier. Nothing about the flowers, the stream, or the towering pines suggested that destiny had quietly unfolded among them. I still do not understand why this happened, she admitted honestly. Nathan answered with gentle sincerity. Neither do I. I only know that when I saw you, my wolf became completely still. Claire met his eyes. There was no fear within them, only truth. Before either of them could speak again, voices drifted through the trees as several villagers approached the clearing after noticing unfamiliar horses near Claire's cottage. Mrs. Evelyn Carter arrived first, followed by old Samuel Turner and several curious neighbors. They stopped immediately when they recognized the royal crest embroidered across Nathan's coat. One by one they respectfully lowered their heads. Samuel slowly looked from Nathan to Claire before noticing Little Moon sitting happily between them. The old man's thoughtful expression gradually became one of quiet understanding. So that is why he came, Samuel whispered. Mrs. Carter smiled warmly toward Claire. I always believe kindness has a way of finding its way home. Nathan stepped beside Claire, not ahead of her. The simple gesture did not escape the villagers. Instead of placing distance between a king and an ordinary young woman, he chose to stand as her equal. Nathan looked toward the gathered villagers before speaking with calm conviction. The little messenger has completed the ancient rite entrusted to him by our ancestors. He gently placed one hand over his heart. Today I received a blessing greater than any victory or crown. He turned toward Claire with quiet certainty. The woman who welcomed him without expecting anything in return is the woman destiny has chosen to stand beside me. Silence filled the clearing before gentle smiles slowly appeared across familiar faces. Mrs. Carter brushed away grateful tears while Samuel removed his hat with deep respect. No one celebrated because Claire had suddenly become important. They celebrated because the woman they had always known had remained exactly the same. Claire looked around the little village that had shaped her gentle heart before returning her gaze to Nathan. She still felt overwhelmed, but she no longer felt afraid. Little Moon happily barked once before sitting proudly between them beneath the warm afternoon sunlight. Nathan smiled at the tiny messenger and quietly realized that the smallest traveler in the kingdom had accomplished what no king, council, or prophecy ever could. He had found not only the future Luna, but the gentle heart that would one day teach an entire kingdom that true greatness always begins with kindness. Several days passed before Claire agreed to travel to Ironcliff Palace, not because she doubted Nathan's sincerity, but because she wanted to understand the path waiting before her rather than simply accepting it without thought. Nathan respected her decision completely. Instead of urging her to leave immediately, he remained in Willow Creek, staying in the modest village and rather than asking Claire to abandon the life she had always known overnight. Every morning they walked together through the quiet forest while Little Moon bounded happily between them, chasing butterflies, splashing through shallow streams, and returning every few minutes to make certain neither of them had wandered too far away. The peaceful routine allowed conversation to grow naturally, without ceremony or expectation. Nathan learned that Claire had inherited her cottage from her grandmother, who had taught her that kindness should never depend upon whether anyone noticed. Claire learned that Nathan preferred early mornings in the palace gardens over formal banquets, remembered the names of palace workers, and believed a ruler should spend more time listening than speaking. The more they talked, the less the difference between king and villager seemed to matter. One quiet afternoon, they paused beside the same flower-filled clearing where they had first met. Claire gathered fresh lavender, while Nathan carefully helped bundle the stems with simple twine, smiling at his own lack of experience. Claire laughed softly. You hold a sword much more confidently than wildflowers. Nathan looked at the uneven bundle in his hands before laughing with her. That may be the most accurate observation anyone has ever made about me. Little Moon proudly carried a single lavender stem through the grass before placing it at Claire's feet, earning another gentle smile. As the days continued, the villagers watched the Alpha King with growing respect. He accepted homemade bread from Mrs. Evelyn Carter with sincere gratitude, helped Samuel Turner repair a weathered fence without announcing who he was, and spent time listening to children describe imaginary adventures inspired by the tiny white wolf. Nathan discovered that the quiet village possessed a richness no palace treasury could measure. Claire watched those moments carefully. She realized the man beside her never treated kindness as a performance. He offered it naturally because it reflected who he truly was. One evening as the sun settled behind the distant hills, Nathan and Claire sat upon the small porch outside her cottage while Little Moon slept peacefully between them. Fireflies drifted across the garden, and the gentle fragrance of herbs filled the cooling air. Nathan looked toward the stars slowly appearing overhead. May I ask you something? Claire nodded. Of course. He folded his hands thoughtfully before speaking. When Little Moon first appeared, why did you trust him? Claire smiled at the sleeping pup before answering. I did not trust him because he was a wolf. She gently stroked the tiny messenger's soft fur. I trusted him because he looked frightened and tired. Sometimes kindness begins before certainty does. Nathan quietly repeated her words in his mind. Kindness begins before certainty. He smiled warmly. That may be the wisest lesson I have ever heard. Claire looked toward him with gentle curiosity. What about you? Nathan met her eyes with complete honesty. When my wolf recognized you, I accepted destiny. But these past few days have given me something even greater. Claire tilted her head slightly. What is that? Nathan answered without hesitation. The chance to know the woman destiny chose. A peaceful silence followed, comfortable and unforced. Neither of them hurried the moment. They simply watched the last golden light disappear beyond the trees, while Little Moon sighed happily in his sleep. The following morning, after saying farewell to the grateful villagers who promised her the cottage would always be waiting whenever she wished to return, Claire climbed into the royal carriage beside Nathan. She did not leave Willow Creek because a prophecy demanded it. She left because trust had quietly grown where two strangers had chosen honesty over expectation. As the carriage rolled gently along the forest road toward Ironcliff Palace, Little Moon rested comfortably across both of their laps. Perfectly content that the journey he had begun alone would now continue with the two hearts he had patiently brought together. Several months passed, and with the arrival of early autumn, Ironcliff Palace seemed transformed in ways no royal architect could ever have designed. The towering stone walls remained the same. The marble halls still reflected generations of history, and the royal banners continued to wave proudly above the kingdom, yet something far more important had changed. Warmth had quietly settled into every corner of the palace because Claire never allowed kindness to remain an occasional gesture. She turned it into a way of living. Every morning, she visited the palace kitchens to thank the cooks before breakfast was served. She spent afternoons walking through the royal gardens beside elderly gardeners who taught her the names of flowers that had bloomed there for decades. She welcomed village children invited to the palace with books, warm smiles, and patient conversations that made even the grandest halls feel less intimidating. The palace staff quickly realized that their new Luna remembered birthdays, asked about families, and thanked every servant by name. Nathan watched these simple moments with quiet admiration. He had always believed leadership depended upon wisdom and responsibility, but Claire gently showed him that true leadership also depended upon making every person feel seen. Little Moon had grown noticeably larger during those peaceful months, though he still carried the same playful spirit that had first led him across the kingdom. He spent his mornings following Claire through the gardens, occasionally running ahead to chase butterflies before returning proudly with a single fallen flower gently held between his teeth. Nathan often laughed at the little wolf's cheerful determination, a sound that palace servants admitted they had rarely heard before Claire arrived. Commander Ryan Brooks noticed the change more than anyone. One afternoon after a successful council meeting, Ryan joined Nathan beside the palace balcony overlooking the busy capital below. Merchants filled the market square, children played beneath colorful banners, and travelers from distant territories wandered peacefully through the streets. Ryan smiled quietly. The kingdom feels different. Nathan rested his hands upon the carved stone railing while watching Claire below speaking with several young apprentices learning to care for the royal gardens. Little Moon sat faithfully beside her, accepting gentle pats from delighted children. "It does," Nathan answered softly. Ryan looked toward his king with thoughtful curiosity. "Do you remember the day we wondered whether the ancient rite had failed?" Nathan smiled warmly. "Now I understand it was never delayed." His silver-gray eyes remained fixed upon Claire. It simply needed enough time to find the right heart. Not long afterward, High Elder Eleanor Whitmore invited Nathan and Claire into the ancient sanctuary where the oldest royal records had been preserved for centuries. Upon a polished stone table rested the same weathered journal Nathan had studied since childhood. Eleanor carefully opened the fragile pages before smiling at the young couple. "Every Alpha King adds one final entry after destiny fulfills its promise." Nathan accepted the fountain pen with quiet respect. He looked at the blank page waiting beneath generations of history before beginning to write. His words were simple because the greatest truths rarely required many sentences. He wrote that the messenger had completed his journey exactly as the ancestors promised. He wrote that kindness had proven stronger than pride, that humility had accomplished what power never could, and that the greatest blessing in his life had arrived without seeking a throne. When he finished, he gently passed the journal to Claire. She hesitated before adding only one sentence beneath his. She wrote that every heart deserves kindness before it deserves judgment. Eleanor quietly wiped away grateful tears as she closed the ancient book. Future generations will read these words, she whispered. May they remember them well. That evening, Nathan and Claire stood together upon the eastern balcony where the first cool breeze of autumn carried golden leaves gently across the palace gardens. Below them, families walked peaceful paths illuminated by warm lanterns while musicians played soft melodies in the distance. Little Moon rested comfortably between them, no longer the tiny traveler who had awakened upon Claire's chest months before, but a healthy young wolf whose bright silver eyes reflected complete contentment. Nathan gently took Claire's hand, smiling as he remembered the ordinary morning that had quietly changed 2 lives forever. He found more than my true mate, Nathan said softly while looking down at Little Moon. Claire smiled and gently scratched behind the young wolf's ears. What else did he find? Nathan looked across the peaceful kingdom stretching beyond the palace walls before meeting her warm hazel eyes once again. He found the heart that reminded an entire kingdom that greatness begins with kindness, that destiny recognizes compassion before crowns, and that sometimes the smallest messenger carries the greatest miracle. Beneath the fading sunlight, Little Moon peacefully closed his eyes between the Alpha King and his Luna while the palace, the village, and the kingdom beyond continued living beneath a future quietly shaped by love, humility, and the gentle courage of one ordinary young woman who never realized that the safest place a tiny wolf could find would also become the place where destiny finally came home.